the words modest, self-effacing, talks about luck, we got lucky, my team did this, comes across consistently. And there's a number of such stories all over the book. Whereas when you compare them with the comparisons, what tends to happen is the guys where it's about their ego, they set up successes for failure. They cut down people that are seen as competition. It's about them. It's about them being in the news. This guy never got written about in the papers. He talked about shutting down the mills. They basically tore into shreds. As they enjoyed, right, as Jim points out later in the book, the first article in Fortune magazine, I think it was Forbes magazine, eventually said Kimberly Clark made a fantastic transition. When they first started, we clearly predicted they were going to do a terrible job. And now look at them. The time frame between those two articles was 21 years. So the prediction was 21 years earlier. And they never wrote about Darwin Smith in between. So you see almost no articles in most of these guys that they picked. They picked Wells Fargo's transition. They picked Nucor in steel, became the #1 steelmaker in the US. There were Nucor stood for the Nuclear Corporation of America. They went from nuclear power completely into steel to become the #1 steelmaker in America. So the whole issue is about the more, these guys focus on the company and building something beyond themselves. So they tend to set up successes. They tend to set up successes for success. I forget the individual he talked about at Fannie Mae that completely changed over Fannie Mae from an old bureaucracy to a great business. Of course, they've had more trouble recently. But he retired. He had $100 million in options and stuff that were in bonuses after a 25-year period. So on his retirement, the issue of executive compensation came up. Now remember, he's been retired 3 years. And he had some, final golden tail due here of about $5 million. He called up his successor, told him to cut that payout. He had no cause to. He was no longer linked to the company. He didn't take that bonus. He helped his successor not have to face a firestorm of controversy this way. So that's the kind of behavior that these guys talk about. So they talk about level 4 leaders as that traditional, don't get me wrong, he doesn't say Jack Welch is a bad leader. But the correlation of larger than life egos that focus more on the short term and what they can get, as opposed to people that are focusing on building something that builds far beyond themselves, is very different. The motives are different, what they focus on becomes very different. The focus is organization building, the focus is succession building, the focus is culture building. Whereas the other guys, larger than ego, is I came in, I changed this business, let me turn this around, let me do this. That doesn't mean people don't succeed, but they don't set up for when they're no longer there. So some of them can be highly negative and destructive. There are others, they talk about Teledyne. Again, I'm sorry, the names are escaping me. I'll have to look him up and I don't want to waste the time. The gentleman who founded Teledyne ran it single-handedly, built it from scratch, took it to 293rd in the Fortune 500 list. Ran it till the age of 70, 100 acquisitions, but he pretty much, as they said, ran it himself. Held it all together himself. Worked through his life at a frenetic pace and could hold and make the whole thing happen.
Henry Singleton.
Henry Singleton, thank you. He retires, company comes apart. Not a bad person, not a negative ego. It's just that he didn't create the institutional structures for something that would survive beyond him or run without him.
That's what I guess the ISO and other systems are about. It's process dependent, not person dependent.
Well, I think there's a slight difference here. Processes are important, but I think the focus here is about culture and institution building. Processes can be built in companies that are mediocre. Right? Processes are about repeatability. Cultures of innovation are different. Right? Apple doesn't need ISO.
Right.
ISO is more about document what you do and do what you document.
Right. I was going to come to Apple, but then I think Tim Cook was the only person who never got written about.
Sure.
And he ran the company with Steve Jobs, pulling all ends, and Jobs was always the guy in the limelight.
But guys, the point you have to, the interesting thing about Jim Collins and is they deliberately pick companies that have very long track records. Let's get real. For the time frame that he's talking about, Apple is not even on the list.
Right.
There's only 25, 30-year history so far. Just barely starting to get on the list. So we'll have to wait. They won't even qualify for his book yet.
So, and there are definitely question marks on Apple. I mean,
Yeah, you don't know what will happen with Jobs out of the picture. What happens another few years down? Who knows? When Ellison goes out of Oracle, what happens? Who knows? That doesn't mean the companies are incompetent, but we see. So his point is, he deliberately chose time frames and companies that have so much history that a single leader, just a single leader, can't have made all the difference. So he tried to rule out all the variables that people tend to talk about as sort of systematic for success. The other stuff that came up in the fireside chat that I was listening into, people said, well, the pace of business is increasing. It's just going like crazy. Google has come and reinvented a certain part of the business. Apple's gone and completely reinvented the mobile phone business. Is this time different than any other time? And and that's what I loved about listening to Jim Collins. That's why I was so excited to now go back and read the book. The guy sits just still for a couple of seconds and he gives you a simple answer that says, look, if you think that there's anything new going on, you're wrong. Okay? Because everything we're seeing is no different than gas light gets replaced by electricity. There were huge gas companies, and overnight, their businesses changed out from under. This is no different than what happened when deregulation hit, say, banking or airlines. This is no different than when technology shifts. The refrigerator got invented, and all these companies that used to saw ice up in the Canadian lakes and ship them down to the south went out of business overnight. They were spending all their time on how they can get bigger blocks of ice with less meltdown, and somebody invented the fridge. Right? It's no different. And some of the speeds of change are no different. Yet, you take Procter & Gamble, 150 years of existence. 150 years. They saw everything invented. Yeah, airlines, airplanes, connectivity, electricity, you name it. Existed 150 years, top of the game. So that's his whole thesis is, what makes this kind of longevity happen? What makes a company perform at this level? What makes a company that was running along at a certain pace suddenly seem to break out at a point and then stay up there, not just disappear? So the Apples and the others, they're one generation. These are multi-generational players. What do they do? What can they make happen? Not to say, geez, it's a fantastic company. Sure, it's a highly repeatable company. Jack Welch is just one of a line of CEOs and leaders in that company that has gone. One ingredient is level 5 leadership. Second point he made is, out of all of 10 of the companies that they studied, 9 of these guys came from inside the company. It wasn't the outside guy brought to come in to change things and shake up the stuff. It was internal veterans who knew the company intrinsically, who understood it intrinsically in their gut, that did the best. That's what he was talking about. The correlation from external folks coming in, being brought in with this bigger-than-life leader, is what has a huge negative correlation on success, on the breakout from good to great.
And having an insider creates the process easy to create a successor.
It's not necessarily easy. It's typically their style, their behavior. So the conclusions he's drawing is that it's their style, their behavior,
culture,
their model, their personal behavior. So the level 5 leadership, very specifically, as he said, is really a mix of, it's a paradoxical mix of personal humility and professional growth. It's a complete paradox. On the one side, very modest, very self-effacing. You wouldn't, if you saw the guy in the room, he wouldn't shine up the room. He's not the center of the room ever. There may not be any charisma at all. But they're massively ambitious, but about the company, not for themselves. And that's what leads to them saying, if something has to survive beyond me, then I have to have a successor. It has to be the right successor. Then he has to set up the successor for success, not failure. Right? So he talks about unexpected findings. As they looked at the data, they thought that the larger-than-life celebrity leaders would write in from the outside. Well, the unexpected finding was, as we talked about it, negatively correlated from going from good to great. 10 of 11 good to great CEOs came from inside the company, whereas the comparison companies tried outside CEOs 6 times more often. All of them sort of went down the tubes. level 5 leaders attribute much of their success to good luck rather than personal greatness. Whole bunch of others are different. He talked about Lee Iacocca. First stage, behaved like that, then seemed to switch over to where it became about him and running for president and doing all the other things that sort of distracted him from the company. So he believes that we weren't looking for this. The data is empirical. This is what they found, and so you know, that's it is what it is. So not Mark Cuban, not when I die I want to come back. It's me.
So would it be fair to say that the companies who are embracing the ideas and change from outside in and implement them inside out would flare to move from to great?
I don't think so. Why don't we go through the ingredients? So one ingredient very clearly was the guy at the top had an attitude of wanting the company to succeed and survive beyond himself. I think that's the key ingredient. And so everything, his own personal ego was tied into making the company great, not making himself be bigger than the company. I think that's the core sort of number one ingredient. So he has 5 that he talks through. And then let's catch up with that. So is that does the outside guy work? At times it does, right? But I think what he's saying is that notion of organization building is an essential prerequisite. The next element, you know, get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus. We've learned it the hard way as well over time. You know, the unexpected finding, what is traditionally looked at as management science is, you know, you get the great leader, comes in with this great new strategy, makes stuff happen. These guys completely reverse it. The focus is saying, you know what, first who, then what. Completely the other way around. A lot of these guys didn't focus on a what at all. They first focused on getting all the right people on the bus, in the right seats, and getting the wrong people off the bus. And then said, now you guys tell me what we should do. So the focus is completely non-traditional, begin with the who, not with the what. Wells Fargo, and you know, they looked at Wells Fargo and Bank of America at the point deregulation happened. For those of you who, I don't know if everybody knows Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has been a, you know, obviously retail bank, primarily on the West Coast. So when you see the old Wild West movies, the stagecoach is typically carrying Wells Fargo carrying money over, right? And that's actually their logo and their picture, and they have like stagecoaches in the lobby of their headquarters building and stuff. So you can see that in San Francisco next time. Actually, a little mini museum. Wells Fargo, deregulation hit in the 70s. And both Wells Fargo and Bank of America were roughly poised in the same way. Citi was out there selling internationally, huge international chains. And the strategy that was initially taken in both Wells Fargo and Bank of America was to try to grow internationally, compete with Citi. Wells basically, Dick Cooley, focused not so much on strategy when he came in charge. Again, level 5 leader, same sort of style. No great shakes, hang up. I'll talk about more of some of his strategies a little bit later. But he focused pretty much on just hiring the best people. He spent all of his time picking up the best people he could find. Collected them, and you know, they talk about the fact that you know, a couple of decades later, when they looked at, you know, when his successors were asked about what was their core success, it's the teams they inherited from Dick that helped them grow further. And apparently, when you go back and look at the list of people that were brought on board, almost all of them went on to become CEOs of major companies in the financial industry. That's the kind of people they brought on board. Bank of America, in contrast, brought in what they called you know, a weak general, strong lieutenants strategy, where the idea really was that, look, if you bring in very strong people up top, the guys that, you know, it causes a certain amount of friction, you know, the guy that doesn't quite make it, hates it, leaves. And they worried more about that, trying to create a set of, you know, reasonable, sort of we'll get it kind of, you know, we'll get the job done when you tell them what to do type of folks in place, with a stronger tier of lieutenants below, because they felt that if they got strong generals, the strong lieutenants would leave. So there was too much fear about that. Whereas Wells Fargo basically worked with the assumption saying, we want to get the best people, we accept at some point they'll leave to go become CEOs somewhere else. But we'll get the best time out of them during that time. Led to a lot of success for them. When deregulation hit, nobody really managed to predict what was going to happen. Having the best team on board that knew what the hell they were talking about allowed them to simply find the way. Behind that, there was a culture of open discussion, and we'll get to that in a bit. But the whole point was, if you get people that know what they're doing, you're more likely to succeed if you let them do what they need to do. Not create some grand strategy and then sort of try to tell your people what to do relative to that. Leads to very different results. It leads to highly sustainable results. You can succeed in a directive fashion, but it's easier to succeed when everybody is pretty much a master of what he's doing. So looking for all A+ players. Fannie Mae, same transition. The gentleman came on board and he talks about the fact that getting the right people on the bus requires a lot of discipline and a lot of rigor. It's not just about saying, okay, I want to, and we talk about it, and we want the best talent, and we're going to go recruit. We do about the same things. The guy who took over Fannie Mae came in, talked to all 26 executives. He says, we're going to change everything. Okay? You're going to work harder than you have in your life. You're either on the bus, or let me know if you want to be off the bus. Right? But this is how it's going to have to be, and if it's not going to fit for you, no harm done, move on. 14 of 26 executives left. And he went to work filling it with the best he could hire. So the big jumps for all of these